Hello! Welcome back to my channel. Here's my review of this week's Game of Thrones episode, which is entitled Eastwatch. I want to start by saying I was very frustrated on the whole by this episode of my favourite show. I felt like the writing was sloppy, like the story is being rushed, and the finer details, which are what make the A Song of Ice and Fire series so great, are being glossed over in favour of big action sequences. This was exactly what I was concerned about when the show overtook the books, and while I don't blame HBO or D&D at all for that, damn you, Martin, and your slow writing process. This story is way too complex to be written without the original author's roadmap, and I feel like this episode really highlighted the fact that at times they flounder quite a lot without it. Having said that, I didn't hate it, and there were certainly some episodes in season 6 which I felt were a bit of an anticlimax and were paced really poorly, and season 6 ended up with the big dual payoff of Battle of the Bastards and the Winds of Winter. So fingers crossed this week is just a small hiccup, and next week they'll come back on track with the awesome. Just like last week, I'll be using the callback alert, so anytime that you hear this sound, callback alert, it means I found a callback to an earlier season which requires analysis. And so, in the words of Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen, shall we begin? Now, the title sequence this week featured Eastwatch by the Sea. Nerdgasm! Last week I made a bunch of predictions and I got almost all of them wrong, which is cool. I'm kind of glad that I can't necessarily predict the way the show is going, because obviously that makes life much more interesting for me. However, one of my predictions last week was that Jaime and Bronn would be captured after they dived into the lake next to Daenerys, and they would become prisoners of war. I also predicted that Bronn would defect. That hasn't happened. What actually happened was that Bronn managed to drag Jaime underwater all the way from the battlefield to a safe place. I think my idea is much more interesting, and this episode would have been of far more superior quality if they'd only listened to me, but what can you do? The next scene shows Tyrion walking through the ashes of the battlefield looking very conflicted and concerned, while a sad version of The Rains of Castamere plays in the background. I'm not sure why he looks so worried about what he's got himself into, because I don't really know what he thought would happen when he got on board with the Dragon Queen and she unleashed her dragons on the battlefield. Take the moral high ground. It's not like you didn't burn an army with wildfire pretty brutally 5 seasons ago. Now the surviving Lannister soldiers are led to Daenerys and Drogon and told to either bend the knee or die. Callback alert! This line that Dany says here is interesting. She refers back to her breaking the wheel speech, which she made to Tyrion in season 5. She describes the wheel as something which has rolled over rich and poor alike to the benefit of only the Cersei Lannisters of the world. I've assumed for a little while that what she meant by breaking the wheel, because Daenerys is unable to have children, although in the books that's kind of debatable, but in the show, as far as we know, she's unable to have children, therefore she can't continue the Targaryen dynasty, and she believes she's the last one. Therefore, my thought is that her legacy will be to put an end to feudalism and create maybe like a republic in Westeros. I do believe that this is what will happen at the end, because the Long Night, let's face it, it's going to absolutely decimate the population of Westeros, especially once the wall comes down, which it will. I think the Long Night would decimate the population the same way that the Black Death did in 14th century Europe, causing the deaths of up to 200 million people, and thus leading to those at the bottom of the food chain gaining far more leverage and bargaining power over the land barons. This then resulted in Wat Tyler and the Peasants' Revolt in the UK, and etc. I can't see many folks surviving the Long Night, and those who do will not be prepared at all to suffer feudalism any longer, after all of the horror that the wars of the 1% or the nobility have brought upon the small folk in Westeros. Anyway, Randall Tarly is a horrible dick. This scene is nonetheless very upsetting. I'm guessing that Daenerys murdering both Randall and his son and heir, Dickon, is supposed to mirror the way that her father, Aerys, murdered Rickard and Brandon Stark in the throne room 20 years earlier. The way the actor who plays Randall exclaims, "Step back and shut your mouth," when Dickon steps forward and says, "You'll have to kill me as well," is really, really powerful and heartbreaking. I don't really understand why he does it, other than the fact that he idolises his dickhead father and wants to follow in his honourable footsteps. And I think if I was Randall, I would have just gone, oh fuck it, I'll bend the knee in order to save the life of my son. But I guess they really needed to hammer home the Mad King parallel, so here we are. The way that Randall grabs his son's hand to comfort him before Drogon barbecues them is really touching. Even though we hate him and he was an abusive dickhead to Sam, he's still a person and these are still utterly senseless deaths. Next we join Jaime and Cersei in the Red Keep, where Jaime is starting to realise how well and truly fucked they are. The big thing about this scene is that Jaime reveals to Cersei that Olenna murdered Joffrey and not Tyrion. I wonder if this is going to change how Cersei views Tyrion now. And then we're onto that scene at Dragonstone with Jon on the cliff and Drogon smelling Targ on him. Here we get it hammered into our head yet again, that Jon is such a special boy because he can pet a dragon. This is a really ridiculous observation to make, but I like the fact that he used his left hand to stroke Drogon, because his right hand should be covered in burn scars after he grabbed the lamp and threw it at the wight that was trying to kill Jeor Mormont in season 1. That kind of attention to detail is what I'm here for. So I think that we're supposed to make of this that, oh look, Drogon can tell he has an affinity with Jon because he's a Targaryen, but Tyrion was able to get near Rhaegal and Viserion in season 6. And no, I don't subscribe to the idea that Tyrion is a secret Targaryen at all. I suppose the purpose of this is it's setting Jon up to ride Rhaegal in the War for the Dawn next season, which is another thing I am not okay with. I just think it's cheesy and I'm really sick of the show hyping up Jon so much. Despite the impression the fandom seems to have, George R.R. Martin has said that Jon and Daenerys are not the main characters, they make up at the most 10% of the story. So when Jon inevitably rides a dragon, it better be edgy and subversive and awesome as fuck, or I will be hugely disappointed. You got that, D&D? Now, moaning aside, the animation here is gorgeous. There's never a time when you're taken out of the moment, and remember that this dragon is in fact CGI because dragons don't in fact exist. So, well done CGI department. And now Jeor Mormont shows up, completely cured from his terminal illness, whatever. This is another prediction I got wrong. I did say that Jorah would show up this week, but I thought that him and Jon would have more of a conversation and Jon would offer back Longclaw to Jorah and Jorah would refuse. However, that could happen next episode. Who knows? Another gripe, when Ser Jorah shows up and Jon tells him that he served in the Night's Watch with his father, this is another opportunity for the show to explain how a man of the Night's Watch who was signed up to serve the Night's Watch for life is now no longer in the Night's Watch and is in fact a king, even though the oath specifically says, I shall win no glory, wear no crowns, hold no lands, etc. Everyone just seems to be fine with this, and considering the entire show and the books starts with Ned Stark beheading a Night's Watch deserter, it's obviously pretty important that those vows are sworn for life, and yet no one is mentioning it, not even Varys, not even Tyrion. I mean, Tyrion did mention it briefly and says you have to tell me what happened one day, but whatever. No, he's not told him, and no one's gone like, should we behead that guy? I mean, I know he's a king, but shouldn't we behead him? Isn't that like the punishment for desertion? I just think it's a huge oversight to have no one questioning how Jon managed to wriggle out of his vows, considering he is very keen to keep it quiet that he actually died and therefore was released from his contract. Anyway, on a more positive note, I'm really loving the Bran scene with all the crows. I feel this further adds weight to my Bran is actually the Night King theory, because Bran's ability to warg an entire murder of crows all at once suggests that if/when he's turned into the first White Walker, that will explain how he can animate thousands of corpses all at once. And the next scene, it's convenient and, you know, lazy that Sam happens to be in the room at the same time as the Maesters are having the discussion about Bran's Raven Scroll from Winterfell, about the Army of the Dead, and etc. Saying that, I do think that this scene was intelligent. Sam's argument that all of the Seven Kingdoms would listen to the Maesters if they advised all of the Lords to send their men to hold the wall is a really important point and an important insight into just how respected the Maesters and the Citadel are in Westeros. The counter-argument by Jim Broadbent's character, I can't remember his name, about how this could just as easily be employed by the Dragon Queen to empty out the lands of soldiers is also a really, really rational point. Being the book nerd that I am, I really enjoyed the reference to Jenny of Oldstones, and no, I can't be asked to explain who she is, look her up. The fact that it's mentioned that Sam's brother and father were just burned alive by Daenerys is something that I'm fairly sure will come up again. I'm guessing after he leaves the Citadel, Sam will head back north and find Jon. I'm guessing at some point Daenerys will be with him and it will come out what happened to his family, which could make his relationship with Daenerys somewhat problematic. Or it might never be mentioned again, who fucking knows. And next we have Team Dany becoming disillusioned with the Dragon Queen and her habit of solving all problems by burning people alive. Tyrion and Varys are sitting on the steps in the throne room at Dragonstone, having a drink of wine and drowning their sorrows. Put a pin in this. This is obviously going to be a big plot point going forward. And next, hooray! D&D actually decided to dedicate a few lines of dialogue to show that Jon has feelings about Bran and Arya being alive and at Winterfell. I thought it was actually really in character that he immediately reverted back to his obsession with the Night King. Now, the White Hunt thing is something that I read about in the plot leaks during the off-season. I really hoped that it was nonsense because I think it's a stupid idea and just an excuse for a big action sequence. Having said that, I then realised that at the end of Book 1, Jeor Mormont sends Ser Alliser down to King's Landing with the Hand of the White that they found in the Haunted Forest in order to put it before the king and demand help for the Night's Watch. So after that, I got on board with the idea of the White Hunt. Also, it is a stupid idea and they all know this, which is kind of the point. It's futile and it's suicidal, but what other choice do they have? Cersei and Dany will not stop warring with each other, and if one stops to go and fight in the north, the other will definitely exploit that advantage. Cooperation is the only way forward, and they will only cooperate if the danger is proved to them. So I decided not to hate this plotline, because it is very in keeping with the canon. I do also know, however, that Book Jon wouldn't go out beyond the wall himself, but then Book Jon isn't the awesome fighter and swordsman that Show Jon is, so fair enough. Next we go to Winterfell, where much to my dismay, the Stark reunion really isn't going as planned. As a Sansa fangirl, I did cheer quite a bit inside when Lord Glover says perhaps we should have chosen you to rule us. I mean, yes, you absolutely should have. It would have been neater, there would have been the War of Three Queens to counter the War of Five Kings in earlier seasons, and it would have meant that Jon was free to go gallivanting off wherever the fuck he felt like, and it wouldn't be such a problem. But hey, patriarchy, what can you do? Arya, fuck off. I love you, but you're sounding exactly like the fucking misogynistic Sansa haters in the fandom. Also, Sansa didn't tell the Northern Lords to fuck off when they had reasonable complaints about Jon deserting his home on the eve of the apocalypse to go south, leaving them all to fend for themselves. Obviously, the simpletons of this world will side with Arya because she's cool and can sword fight, whereas all Sansa has been doing is shoring up the North's defences, ensuring all her people can eat and will survive the winter or the war or whatever comes first. What a bitch, am I right? Sansa's line, I'm sure cutting off heads is very satisfying, but that's not the best way to get people to work together, is perfect. Survival sometimes requires compromise. It requires working with people that you dislike or people who talk shit about you. And Arya, has no one filled you in on what happened the time that your brother Robb beheaded one of his bannermen for treason? Oh, that's right, he lost a huge portion of his army, was forced to form an alliance with the Freys, and then was double-crossed and murdered at a wedding. Maybe you should stop thinking of your sword hand and consider the real politic of the North for once. And fine, maybe Sansa does want to be the queen in the North. I want her to be too. That doesn't mean she'll do anything to usurp Jon. It just means she's not a one-dimensional character and she has ambitions and things that she wants for herself. Arya is being such a bitch here by turning on her sister like this. It's really upsetting and immature, and I hope that nothing worse comes of it, because seeing my Stark babes fight is just really, really painful and hurts my heart. Callback alert! So Davos and Tyrion at the beach at King's Landing, and we get two little callbacks. Tyrion remembering the last time he was here, he killed his father with a crossbow, and Davos reminds him that last time he was here, Tyrion killed his son with wildfire. I'm glad Davos hasn't forgotten his son. He hasn't been mentioned for quite a long time. Please, someone tell me how Tyrion knew that Jaime was still alive. The last time he saw him, he had been pushed in the water in full armour, and for all Tyrion should know, had drowned down there. But no, let's gloss over that. Tyrion somehow knows that Jaime is alive and well and in the Red Keep. That aside, I did enjoy the conversation about the battle tactics. Tyrion was right. What Jaime did was very Tywin-esque, sacrificing Casterly Rock in favour of Highgarden. And it was a really impressive move. Peter Dinklage and Nikolai Coster-Waldau are amazing actors. And I thought this scene was really fantastic. I know a few people have complained that not really enough was made of their reunion, but I didn't feel shortchanged by it. They discussed the battles they'd been on opposing sides for. They discussed their father and Joffrey and the trial. And maybe the conversation was a bit brief, but I think it satisfactorily covered all of the major points. So I was happy. And in the next scene, welcome back Gendry. The little nod to the few thousand is Gendry still rowing memes that are out there was pretty funny. No need to explain why Davos comes looking for Gendry in the first place. It would have been better if he'd just run into him by accident in King's Landing and Gendry had got the adventure bug and begged him to take him with him. I also thought Gendry just having a bag ready to go whenever was a bit stupid. When he leaves his shop, he doesn't even put the fire out in his forge. Seems pretty dangerous in such a crowded city, but okay, whatever. But yay, he's made a replica of his bio daddy's warhammer. That's pretty epic. Good work there, D&D. Next, we're back at the beach at King's Landing, and getting a glimpse of who Davos was before Stannis raised him up to be a knight was pretty cool. His gift of the gab obviously came from the fact that he had to think on his feet to get himself out of sticky situations and stop himself being arrested. It's a cool little reference to his backstory, and I approve. And with a crack of the warhammer, the team are off back on their teleporting boat back to Dragonstone. Next, we're back with Jaime and Cersei in King's Landing, and this conversation about how an armistice between them and Team Daenerys might benefit them is interesting. Cersei mentions that she has the numbers and so they have to be clever about it and fight them like father would have. My immediate thought was they're going to find a way to assassinate her the way that they assassinated Robb Stark and Catelyn Stark at the Red Wedding. And the question, is Cersei really pregnant? It would be a very convenient way of getting Jaime back on side, since he's obviously ready to give up after everything that he's seen. This would have been a really, really touching moment between Jaime and Cersei if it wasn't so open to the possibility that this is all an elaborate ruse of Cersei's to manipulate Jaime. Callback alert! When Cersei says she's going to tell everybody that Jaime is the father of her new baby, and she quotes Tywin and says, "The lion doesn't concern himself with the opinions of the sheep." How lovely. There's no way this isn't going to blow up horribly in their faces. Back to Dragonstone, and Davos has brought Gendry to meet Jon. This little burgeoning bromance between Jon, who is Ned 2.0, and Gendry, who is Robert Baratheon 2.0, is really, really cute. Callback alert! And they discuss that Jon saw Gendry's father at Winterfell and Gendry met Jon's father in his shop in King's Landing. And obviously it's kind of funny because we're all sitting here going like, when they say like our fathers were such great friends, and we're all sitting here thinking, actually, your fathers killed each other, but you don't know that. And oh my god, Gendry telling Jon he's a lot shorter than Ned actually genuinely made me laugh out loud. Poor Kit. Apparently he's only 5'6", and he says that David and Dan always find ways to take the piss out of him for it, even in the scripts. Don't worry, baby, they're just jealous. And Davos has so many great lines in this episode. Yep, nobody mind me, all I've ever done is live to a ripe old age. That's fucking brilliant. The next scene is on Dragonstone Beach. Callback alert! It's nice Jorah and Tyrion reminiscing about the time when they were briefly slaves. These little non-narrative moments between characters are what I live for. Showing what their relationship is and briefly going over their experiences together adds to the realism of the plot and to who they are as people. And Tyrion giving Jorah the coin that they were bought with for luck is a really, really nice touch. And the fact that he has such a warm farewell with Dany, don't think Jorah's coming back. Callback alert! Jon saying, "I wish you good fortune in the wars to come," is something that Sir Arthur Dayne said to Ned Stark before they had their big epic fight right outside the tower where Jon was being born. It's also something that Mance Rayder says to Stannis before Stannis burns him alive. It's never been explained, but I guess that this is just a common saying in Westeros. Anyway, I've decided that I'm just going to start saying it instead of saying goodbye to people. Nerd. And another prediction of mine that was wrong. I'm so happy that Jon is leaving without boning Dany. Please, gods, find out that she's your auntie before you meet again. I doubt that would change Dany's mind about fancying him, but it would 100% change Jon's. So fingers firmly crossed, ladies and gentlemen. It's funny that they subtly show Jorah glancing back at Dany as he pushes the boat into the water, and then it slightly pans across to Jon. who isn't looking back at all, which kind of suggests that Jorah is in love, whereas Jon doesn't necessarily give a flying fuck if he ever sees her again. With Sansa, however, he sure did glance back at her, right after protectively strangling somebody for her. Just saying. #Johnsa. Now, this Sam and Gilly scene in the Citadel, obviously the major take-home from this is the fact that Gilly has unwittingly stumbled across the annulment record of Rhaegar Targaryen's marriage to Elia Martell, and also the marriage certificate of his marriage to Lyanna Stark. This proves that Rhaegar and Lyanna were married and that Jon is not in fact a bastard, but has more claim, because of primogeniture, to the Iron Throne than Daenerys. I actually really like the way that this was done. It was just slipped in there. So if you weren't paying attention, or if you don't necessarily know the books as inside out as some of us do, you could easily miss it. It's like a pretty little Easter egg just tucked in there. What I dislike is the idea that Rhaegar would dissolve his marriage to Elia Martell. My reasoning is thus. In the House of the Undying, in the book A Clash of Kings, which is book 2 in the series, Daenerys sees a vision of Rhaegar holding baby Aegon Targaryen, his second child, with Elia Martell, and he says there must be one more. The dragon has 3 heads. Why, if the dragon having 3 heads is so important, would he annul his marriage to Elia in favour of marrying Lyanna Stark, which would effectively make his older children bastards? I'm not sure of the timeline. I'm pretty sure at the point when he married Lyanna, his 2 children were still alive. And not only that, baby Aegon was still nursing at Elia's breast at the time when Jon was conceived in the Tower of Joy. I've been arguing for years that there's no way in hell 3 of the Kingsguard would sit out the war in order to guard the bastard son of Rhaegar Targaryen. The Kingsguard's job is to guard the king and his legitimate family. They wouldn't give a fuck about a bastard, and Rhaegar wouldn't send them to guard him. So I've always argued, based on that logic, that Jon is 100% legitimate. However, I would not have used annulment to explain this. There is a precedent for Targaryens to practice polygamy. Aegon and his sister wives, Rhaenys and Visenya, are the perfect example of this. So why couldn't he be married to both Elia Martell and Lyanna Stark at the same time? The picture being painted here is that Rhaegar Targaryen is a horrible, shitty person who not only humiliated his wife by riding straight past her to crown Lyanna Stark the Queen of Love and Beauty at the tourney at Harrenhal, but also that he set her and his 2 children aside and left them in huge amounts of danger in King's Landing after starting a fucking war because of his obsession with prophecy. The theory is that Elia Martell was too frail to have any more children, and therefore Rhaegar needed to, because he was so obsessed with prophecy, needed to have a 3rd one, and so that's why he chose Lyanna Stark. And that's fine. I like that he's made this very human mistake and didn't realise the consequences would be so fucking enormous. I just really hope that this is reflected upon in the show when the big reveal occurs. I know that Book Jon would have a lot of really horrible feelings about the fact that his parents' relationship sparked a civil war, and this mess that has followed it ever since is all so that he could be born. So many people died so that Jon could come into the world, including his mother and father, his paternal grandfather, half-brother and sister, grandfather, and his maternal grandfather and uncle as well. All died so Jon could be born. If we don't see Jon Snow having a fucking breakdown over this, along with the huge identity crisis that he would obviously have when he finds out his father isn't Ned Stark, I'm going to be so fucking disappointed and angry. Callback alert! Anyway, when Sam says he's tired of reading about the achievements of better men, he's directly quoting his father Randall, who said that to him at Hornhill last season. Despite all of the abuse, Sam has really internalised his father's way of thinking about the Maesters and is prepared to take a lot more risks and become a lot more assertive in his role in fighting the army of the dead. I'm really excited about what will happen for Sam now. Whether he'll go back to the Wall or go to Winterfell to find Jon, I don't know. Now let's go back to Winterfell. I'm really happy to see Littlefinger playing his sociopathic little games again, after a few seasons of just creeping around Sansa and being a little bit useless. This man is an evil genius, and he thrives off of chaos, especially the chaos created by power vacuums. And as he's already failed with Bran, he is now trying to drive a wedge between the Stark sisters, as that is his best option in getting back in the game and isolating Sansa, who is his key chess piece, from her support structure. Call back Immaculate! So the scroll that Arya found was the letter that Cersei forced Sansa to write when she was in King's Landing, saying that Ned had attempted to usurp Joffrey and that Robb and Catelyn needed to come to King's Landing in order to bend the knee and swear fealty to King Joffrey. At this point, Arya has no idea that it was written under duress, and it will probably come across as pretty treacherous to her considering how she was behaving and the slightest, what she thought was disloyalty from Sansa. However, if she just asks Sansa what the context of this scroll was, I'm sure Sansa will be able to explain exactly what happened at the time. I doubt that'll happen though, and I'd imagine Arya will just be all psychotic and intimidating instead of just asking for clarification about what happened after she escaped King's Landing. I really fucking hope Jon gives her a fucking clip round the ear when he gets back. And now, here we go to Eastwatch. I really love the banter between Tormund and Davos and Jon. Jon's little smirk when Tormund asks if he brought the big woman is fantastic. And woohoo, the Brotherhood are here. This little recap of how they all know and hate each other is really quite nerdgasmic. Jorah and Thoros fought together during the Greyjoy Rebellion at Pike about 15 years earlier. The Hound visited Winterfell as Prince Joffrey's sworn sword in the first 2 episodes, where Jon saw, if not met him. Gendry was sold to Mel and Stannis by Thoros and Beric in season 3, and Tormund recognises the name Mormont because Jeor Mormont was the 997th Lord Commander before Jon. Seeing all these characters interact is really fucking exciting. And the fact that Jon dismisses all of their squabbling by saying we are all on the same side because we're all breathing is a really good way of tying it all together. And when Beric starts proselytizing about the Lord of Light and the Hound says, "Oh my god, shut your hole," is a really fantastic bit of character detail. That, and in the dramatic moment when the camera pans over all of their faces as they stare out into the frozen wastes beyond the wall, Thoros turns to Sandor Clegane and makes a little chin-chin gesture with his hip flask. So overall, I wasn't bowled over by this episode because I feel like, why are they teleporting around so fast? The plot lines seemed a little bit forced, and the fact that Davos has gone from Dragonstone to King's Landing, back to Dragonstone and up to Eastwatch in 1 episode, while the Army of the Dead have moved from Hardhome to like not even at Eastwatch within the span of 2 seasons now. Pretty annoying, I'm not gonna lie. I just hope that they manage to sort of pick up the standard a little bit, considering the first 4 episodes were so good. I'm hoping this was just a little bit of dead weight, and hopefully next week will be super, super good. Fingers crossed, because this was all a little bit disappointing. There were some good bits in it, but overall, even I, as a die-hard fan, couldn't really forgive a lot of the stuff that went on in this episode. But the fact that I got all my predictions wrong, I'm kind of glad about, even though some of them would have been better if I had written them. But hey, who knows if that'll ever happen. It won't ever happen. Thanks for watching my review, guys. Please subscribe, please leave a comment, please share this video, let me know what you thought. And I will be back same time next week to review episode 6. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and have a fantastic week, and I will see you on the flip side. Mwah. Bye.